Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So this is my first time emceeing, by the way, just to just to set the scene. But happy to have this talk with you guys in Chain Abstraction Day. I would like to start with a short intro of how what everyone's working on and how it relates to chain abstraction. Maybe we can start with you.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco. I lead developer relations at Particle Network, and kind of the TLDR of what we're doing at Particle is that we are building a technology called universal accounts, which essentially allows users to have one balance and one account that they can use across all blockchains. So, for example, you can deposit USDC from Polygon, Ethereum, Base, and Arbitrum, and use it all as one single kind of asset that is universally applicable everywhere. So this means that users no longer really have to bridge or manually mine the processes of interacting with multiple chains, and so they have one account that's applicable basically across the entire ecosystem. So we're trying to solve chain abstraction at the user experience, or more specifically, the account level.
Hey everyone, my name is... Testing? We good? Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Kendall. I'm lead a company called Proximity. We work on go-to-market for a lot of the near ecosystem chain abstraction products, which Ilya just did a great job covering, so I won't dive too deep into them. But just as a quick recap, chain signatures is one of them, which is the ability to sign transactions for any chain from a near account or smart contract. A product built on top of that is called the multi-chain gas fee layer, which lets you pay for gas fees on any chain using assets on near, like USDC, near, and others. And FastAuth, which is a way, basically like an embedded wallet solution that can work for any chain.
Hello. Hi, I'm Ankit. I work at Frontier and OneBalance. 6 months ago, we wrote something called Cake Framework. And then recently, we are working on OneBalance, which is a new type of account model, which basically gives users instantaneous cross-chain experience. And that's what we're working on.
Testing? Perfect. Hello, my name is Joe. I'm a co-founder of Mystic Labs, and we're building Calypso, which is one-click actions. The whole idea is to abstract away bridging everything in between and allow users to say, I have ETH, I want to stake here, in one click, no matter where. So.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. What I would like to start with is, because I feel like we're approaching the same problem from different sides, and from your point of view, if you would have to choose one thing that is the biggest blocker of enabling chain abstraction and interoperability, what would be that, and how you guys are approaching that problem? We can just go from that side.
I think the biggest problem currently is it depends on, I guess, the focus of your project, but more specifically with Calypso in our use case, there's a lot of like normality with bad UX in this space currently, I guess, and there's a lot of people trying to solve that problem, and there's very unique and like nuanced ways to do that. So you either have to focus very nichely on one specific avenue there, or you have to try to take it all on at once, and it's a very long and brutal process to do that. So I think that the biggest challenge has been everybody finding their niche, working on it, and then collaborating together, because that was just a long process. But now I think we're getting there to a point where everybody is finding their avenue and everybody can collaborate to kind of build this holistic experience for everybody.
Yeah, if you think about chain abstraction, it's more about users don't see chains anymore. And so every individual or every company at every layer of the stack has to change something in how they behave, how they operate today, because chains are very central to how all the infrastructure is built, how the UX is built, how things are settled. And so I think like all the technology is already available at everyone's hands. What is required is basically changing the mindset and holding hands together and actually making the change to give the user that seamless experience. And so coordination, I think, is like a bigger problem, and coming up to one simple set of standards where people can agree on and just onboard and both users, developers, everyone.
Yeah, I would say for us, one of the things we've found very challenging with chain abstraction is that blockchains are actually quite different. There's a lot of virtual machines. Even though there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of big differences between them and how they work. And a lot of the kind of abstraction solutions require a lot of specific work for each individual chain, which makes it pretty difficult to kind of have a comprehensive solution. So I think what we're excited about with our solution is that it's really more about supporting signing schemes rather than necessarily supporting a specific blockchain, which I think makes the system quite a bit more flexible and means that teams who are kind of leveraging chain signatures can, in theory, settle transactions on any chain by mostly leveraging a lot of the existing tooling for each of those individual chains.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a good question, and I have a few answers to it, but I'll focus on one. I think, first of all, I think what Ankit said is exactly one of the biggest issues with chain abstraction at the moment is that there needs to be better coordination among chain abstraction projects and technologies that are kind of built within the chain abstraction stack. I think the Cake framework is a great way to understand what technologies are kind of within the composition of chain abstraction and the chain abstraction stack. And then even within like projects that are building chain abstraction, that are explicitly creating chain abstraction solutions, I see this is also a need for better coordination. There needs to be some degree of set standards or even just kind of general agreement on shared goals that allow chain abstraction to be more collective in terms of reducing the whole meme that we're just kind of creating another standard to compete with the existing 15 standards. This is actually, I think, a real problem that we're currently approaching within chain abstraction. So I think it's important to avoid this and to be a little bit more collaborative in that sense. I think I'll cheat a little bit. I think the second problem is that the industry as a whole, to some degree, there's a little bit of pushback on chain abstraction. I think there's been some tweets and stuff recently where people have said that they actually want to see and they want to interact with every individual chain. They don't want this to be abstracted from them, which makes sense that this is a foreign idea for a lot of people, and it's a evolution in how we look at user experience and how we look at how users interact with applications day to day. So I do expect, and I think we're already seeing some degree of ideological pushback on the idea of chain abstraction, how it's be implemented. But I think as we actually start to materialize this idea and real solutions start to be present, I think people will hopefully realize that this is a necessary solution, but I think it's going to be some degree of mind share and some hurdle that we're going to face, especially going into the next 6 months.
Both can be true at the same time, right? Like you can have one set of users who don't care about these chains and one set of users who really care about them.
Abstraction is a spectrum, which I think it's a good way to say it.
I think those are very good points, which is kind of my next question is related to that, because right now what you said is some part, or what we were talking about is some people like to be more in chain abstracted side of things, and some are more involved, want to be more involved. When you're building chain abstracted experiences, what are the trade-offs that you're taking compared to the current status quo of how people interact with chains? Maybe we can talk about that a little bit starting from here. Anybody?
I think currently the trade-off is if you're more, as they were talking about, if you're a more advanced user, certain users might not really want the experience that chain abstraction brings, especially because it kind of creates assumptions for the user in many cases. So if you're a user that is very specific on what you want to do, you know exactly what you want to do, how you want to get there. I think chain abstraction probably wouldn't be a great product, whatever, if the product's using chain abstraction, for example, our product wouldn't be a great use case for you. You're not really a target user in that sense. I think the target user would be more somebody that is okay with giving up certain decisions when it comes to, I want to do this, I have this, make it happen. So I think that the trade-off comes down to your user. Like, is the user more advanced? What comes with that more advanced user? And then how do you build the processes around that? And then you can even get into like more specifics where you're building around chain abstraction, and I want to build for a core user base that maybe I'm making those decisions and those assumptions for, but I want to actually build out the product so I have a more advanced user base and I can let them choose those specific decisions. And I think that's what a lot of the core technologies like chain signatures, Agoric's orchestration, I think are doing. And I think that helps us get there. So,
I think there are like 5 core trade-offs that you need to come around some agreement on. And so like the one is on the UX layer, which is as we already discussed, UX or users have user preferences are a spectrum. Some users use a hardware wallet, and they actually read each and every bytecode before signing something. And then there are some users who use Telegram bots. But Telegram bots are still important because they generate like 30% of the order flow now. And so user preferences are a spectrum across like how much user experience they want versus how much security they want. The second is what you are trying to transfer across chains. Like, are you trying to transfer information? So are you trying to vote on a governance thing, or are you trying to transfer value? So are you trying to transfer tokens? Are you trying to do swaps? And there are some decisions that you need to do over there as well. There are trade-offs with respect to speed. Sometimes users just want to do things very, very quickly, and so they're very happy to pay a high amount of price for that, versus sometimes users are willing to wait. And because things are multi-chain and things are asynchronous, there's also like reliability or transaction execution guarantee issues. Like sometimes things might just fail because the state has just moved due to the latency issues. And so these are, I think, the 5 trade-offs, and that's what also we wrote in the Cake framework. And depending on what type of user you want to make a product for, you can pick and choose different Lego blocks in these different layers of the cake and build a particular solution for them.
Okay, so yeah, I agree with Ankit. I think that abstraction, as was said, a few times in the past few minutes, is ultimately a spectrum that is dependent upon user decision. And I mean, the way that I typically look at it is typically like applications and how they intend their audience to interact with their application. Some applications might expect a more advanced audience that requires less levels of abstraction, less layers of abstraction, where it's more direct with whatever they're doing. They see the chains that they're using, they see the routes that they're taking, et cetera. And so they can more accurately assess risk, and kind of there's less trust assumptions that you don't have to trust less entities. Whereas some applications, like for example games or SocialFi, et cetera, that are more consumer facing, they might be more abstracted. So the degree of abstraction is greater than something that is assuming a more technical audience. This is important. This means that whenever you're looking at, well, how much abstraction should you have? What are the assumptions, the trust assumptions associated with this? The way that I see it is that it usually comes down to the application. And so even in scenarios where you have the maximum level of abstraction, where you really remove all this from end users, which is going to be, I would guess, a more common scenario, especially when you get into this new era of kind of like consumer-facing blockchain. I think this is where you have a lot of the trust that kind of now lays on applications, and to some degree is also solvers whenever you get into intent-centric systems, which I repeat this all the time, but I believe it was Everclear that said it, that solvers are also economically incentivized to make more secure decisions. Applications are to some degree, by just the nature of being a more free market, are incentivized to make more secure decisions on the chains that they use, and choosing chains that are inherently more secure and robust, and handling user funds in a way that's more responsible. So I think when you look at trust assumptions and how much abstraction you should have, it ultimately comes down to the application, the intended audience, and how these users are going to interact with this application. But even those more severe scenarios where really it is ultimately a almost Web3 invisible experience, I still don't see this necessarily as much of a risk, because these are the users that want that experience, and you still have a large degree of incentives for better security.
Yeah, I think to dive even deeper into that point, I think it's very accurate that the trust assumptions, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think to paint like a very explicit point on this, if a user just wants to trade from one asset to another, basically whatever route is taken is not particularly relevant to them. As long as they end up with the asset they desire to have at a price that is within their slippage tolerance, they're okay with that. Where it gets more complicated is something like using a lending protocol, where you're actually going to be locking up funds for an extended period of time, because then you're actually ultimately trusting wherever those funds end up, and then for like some kind of unknown or unspecified potentially duration. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how a lot of these products and applications and everybody in the whole stack kind of navigates that specific set of trade-offs when it comes to like more long duration, trusted counterparty-esque type of situation, even if the counterparty is ultimately a smart contract.
Those are very good points. What I would like to also take a look at from a trade-off standpoint is, are we still having a trusted system, or are we moving the trust assumptions to different places while we're creating chain abstracted experiences? What are your thoughts on this? Do we still on the path of making everything trustless, or are we trying to, from moving the trust assumption from bridges to solvers, are we moving the problem, or are we actually solving the problem? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a combination of both. to be brutally honest. But I think that to get to a spot where you can go, I want Z, this I have A, make it happen. You inherently have to make trust assumptions, and I think over time we might get to a spot where a lot of the abstraction is built around actually making it 100% trustless, but by a degree, when you're going to an application and you're using it, you're already implying trust in that application in one way or another. So I think that depends on how you look and what your definition of trustless is, but I think we're, just like, I mean, the space in general, the ecosystem as a whole over the last decade, I think we'll get to a spot over 3, 5, 10 years where it becomes more and more trustless. It might not be there from the get-go, but I do think it's a combination of both, to be honest.
Yeah, I think like the trust assumptions would generally increase because you're abstracting details away from the user, but the core thing that you're trying to solve is that users don't need to make those decisions anymore, and so users are trusting the dApps. And so instead of the users deciding what chain I need to move my assets on, the users are just trusting the dApps that the dApps are deploying on the correct chains, and the dApps decide where the assets are deployed. And so that is one trust assumption that might have changed because we have abstracted away some of the details. But I would argue that users still trust dApps today anyways. Like if you go to Uniswap, you trust that the Uniswap smart contract has been audited properly. If you go to their website, you trust that their website has not been hacked in the last 10 minutes or whatever. And so there is some amount of trust that already users do when they use dApps. You're just increasing the amount of trust surface.
Yeah, I think it seems like there's some consensus that you are, in fact, at least shifting the trust assumptions and probably increasing them. I think the really important thing is like, yes, ultimately you're probably going to be increasing some trust assumptions here. What's critical though, and kind of is critical for the whole space, is that even with these increased trust assumptions, like these applications should be pretty damn verifiable, like as verifiable as possible at every level that they possibly can. And there should be alternatives, right? I think it would be unfortunate if we ended up in a scenario where it was like everything was purely solver based and off chain and you didn't have like AMMs or things that like purely on chain liquidity anymore, because then you don't even have like that check and balance of like alternative systems, or it would take some time to kind of rebuild them. So I think that's kind of like a future that is a little bit scary, but I think the beauty of crypto is if you have like different trade-offs, right, for different users, then everybody can kind of like make the sort of assumptions that they're comfortable with, and then hopefully we maintain a culture of verify everything. So even if right now you're basically trusting experts other than you for the most part to audit smart contracts or the protocols you use, or trusting that process happened even if it's not very explicit. And I think it's important that like that mindset and that kind of culture is maintained, even if we shift towards like kind of slightly more trusted systems for a lot of use cases.
Yeah, I think this is all true. I think really in terms of an ecosystem-wide goal, maybe a trustless future is not super practical, especially with the type of user experience that we're trying to achieve. I think rather trust minimized is probably a more accurate goal to strive towards, because these trust assumptions are unavoidable whenever you're abstracting things away, whenever you're removing information from the user, whenever you're doing things for them, then inherently there's some degree of trust. But I think importantly is that there's things done to minimize this trust and make it more like less risky for the user. But I think at the same time, like something that is a little bit less talked about with chain abstraction is that chain abstraction, in terms of how it affects the market, means that applications are actually competing on a much larger basis now. So applications aren't competing within siloed ecosystems. They aren't competing within, for example, Polygon, or I'm not competing with like another DEX on Polygon. I'm competing with the entire Web3 industry because users are universalized. And at the same time, this means that because applications have a much higher degree of competition with one another, their incentives to create more secure and ultimately user-focused experiences are also increased. And so this is one important part of chain abstraction, I think, goes beyond just user experience, is that applications and really the whole competitive market moves towards rewarding more secure experiences and more secure applications and things that make better decisions, more responsible decisions. So I mentioned this a moment ago, but I think that this is one of the most important considerations when it comes to the risk and the trust attached to it, because if we get to an ecosystem where you have these leading applications, I think these applications will be leading, and you're going to have the applications that will emerge because they make more responsible decisions, and this is going to be a big factor of who wins and kind of the application race.
Cool. I think, yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. Basically, trust assumptions always there. We're trying to make everything trust minimized. From an interoperability standpoint, because that's what we're also want to talk about, what I would like to get to is, in your own project context, what are you guys working on specifically that excites you a lot right now, that would help the chain abstraction developers navigate this interoperability labyrinth and all of this hardships that comes with it?
I think what was spoken about before probably, where there's a lot of blockchains, there's a lot of protocols, there's a lot of everything, and that comes with a lot of fragmentation. And I think as a builder coming into the space, just in general, let alone trying to build something with chain abstraction, you can get really overwhelmed with the large amount of standards across various blockchains. So I think it's pretty exciting to see now we're getting to a spot where everybody sees that problem, they're working on it, and as new developers come into the ecosystem, even just Web2 developers that might just be toying with Web3, I think that I'm very excited to see an easier entrance for those developers. And I think that has been a big problem that I've seen around me a lot, and I think it's being solved pretty rapidly. Just in the last 6 months, I would even say. There's been a drastic change in that direction.
And specifically from your project standpoint?
We've ran into that from our project standpoint. So for example, we do one-click actions from, let's say, EVM into Cosmos. We're very Cosmos heavily oriented. So let's say you have Ethereum, ETH on Ethereum, and you want to stake in the Cosmos Hub. Doing that now takes about 6 or 7 steps. We're trying to abstract that away entirely, so it's one click, one signature. That goes across 3 different ecosystems. It goes across 4 different blockchains. All 4 have different standards. It's just a mess. So as a developer coming into this, trying to build those step by step, it becomes very challenging because you're just learning 24/7, which I mean in all regards is what a developer essentially is doing every single day. And it's just a big hurdle to overcome when you're just trying to build a product, right? So you get distracted a lot. We ran into this. I see it around me often, and I think that I'm very excited to see that the space is now moving towards a place where I'll use it again, but abstracting away that with chain signatures, agoric orchestration, and stuff along those lines.
Yeah, at One Balance, what we are trying to provide is this instantaneous experience to the user. So the user might use any upstream wallet as service or order flow or dApp, and as soon as they click the button, they get the execution on the target chain, and then they don't have to wait for finality for anything. And it's also agnostic of any type of coordination layer, any type of solver layer, any type of execution layer underneath it. So it's just like a thin middle layer of new account that we're proposing that just reduces the user's time to wait for execution, and lets more sophisticated parties like the solvers who get paid to do these, who get paid to find these routes, and who get paid to hold liquidity, and who get paid to do execution, do the job for the user and wait for eventual settlement. But for the user, it's just one-click, single, instantaneous experience.
Yeah, I liked what Ethan said earlier about turning crypto into kind of this like from a bunch of marketplaces or kind of specific products on single chains to kind of creating just a unified sort of marketplace of all these products. And I think what we've been excited about with what we're working on is that we can make it a bit more straightforward for, I think, developers to build products that can just serve multiple chains without making a whole lot of assumptions about how those chains work or even what chains even exist. And I'm hopeful that we see an increasing number of categories of products like oracles or bridges that they just really want to serve anyone who's willing to consume basically the product that they're putting out there, regardless of chain. Like they're not particularly like maxy about any chain. And I think we're excited to like push on that design space and like try to really see this kind of new category of application flourish. And I think just create a more competitive marketplace for users, which will ultimately improve the UX.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like the idea of the chain agnostic application. So applications that exceed the confines of any specific chain. At Particle, we do a little bit more of a user-facing technology. So applications will integrate our SDK that essentially allows users to onboard in this application using what we call a universal account. That basically allows, it's a smart account that they can use to then interact with this chain with balances that they hold in any other chain. So it's basically a way to access a universal pool of users. And this is like what we consider actually is account level chain abstraction. So this means that we specifically target chain abstraction from the account standpoint. So it actually doesn't agnostify applications. But rather below us, below Particle in the stack, you have application level chain abstraction. This is where applications really are agnostified because in the future, developers are going to be able to build applications that not only can take users and onboard users from any blockchain and have them use the application, but actually the application itself is not bound to any specific blockchain, and the application itself interacts and does things across 4, 5, 10, 12 different blockchains. So this is like what I think will be a really exciting future for developers and for applications overall is going to be this kind of like, universalization on both sides, where users can onboard from any chain. And these applications themselves can interact and compose across any blockchain in the ecosystem. There's a lot of other solutions building towards this, like Socket, Agora, et cetera, that are allowing developers to really orchestrate and compose across chains. So I think that this is also a really exciting part of chain abstraction, that we see like the full stack being a collective of like account level solutions, even including things like chain signatures, and then application level solutions, which allow the true agnostification of applications. And this is really what I think is most exciting for developers.
Very cool. So we're approaching to the last part of our talk. And what I would like to hear from all of you guys is, what do you guys want the incoming developers to utilize, while utilizing your platform or your products, build on top of it, and how you see them using your products going forward to create this chain abstracted world?
For us specifically, I would love to see developers using the abstraction tools we've built along the way to build out our product, and just kind of build out new use cases around it, specifically when it comes to outside of the ecosystems that we're currently targeting, which is mainly just EVM, Cosmos, Near, etc. I think as we've brought up before, that brings competition, which just brings better products. So I think that's what would be great to see.
Yeah, like using what we are building, developers can tap into one balance of users' global state across all the chains, and then give the users instantaneous cross-chain experience where the users don't even need to see the chains anymore. And as soon as they click a button, they get the execution they want.
Yeah, I think like kind of the point everyone's sort of making about like thinking about your application in different ways you can today, in like two important ways. One is the fact that you can actually interact with multiple blockchains in a single product. That's something that's like not really that explored today. And Ilya was talking earlier about an example of this with like, combining Bitcoin and Ethereum and like borrowing USDC to deposit into like Hyperliquid and take out a short position, right? And like tokenizing that. So I think that's like really cool use case. And the other is kind of like building an application in a way that you could serve other developers or other applications on any chain. So like a great example of this is just an Oracle, which like bring your verified price data onto one chain, you kind of sign that payload or like have that payload verified in some way, and then anyone from any other chain can take that payload, like kind of trustless relay it, and then use that information. And I mean, that's just one very basic example. I think there's a whole kind of category around that type of way of building an application.
Yeah, with Particle Network, the way that developers will use it will be relatively straightforward. It's an SDK that you basically plug in as like a typical. It works very similarly to most account abstraction SDKs, where it sort of like exists as a plugin on top of like existing wallets like MetaMask and Rabi and stuff like that. And so it'll allow users to basically leverage a smart account that is universalized. So it, like I mentioned, kind of has one balance, one state that you can use across any application in any chain. So applications will integrate this SDK and then allow users to leverage a universal account within this application. We also have existing social login and account abstraction SDKs that are installed across 900 applications within the ecosystem approximately. So all these applications will actually upgrade automatically to use universal accounts upon launch, and then other developers will be able to integrate it in essentially 20 lines of code, and then instantly unlock kind of this user base that can be from any other ecosystem. So this is how it's used with Particle Network. Very simple SDK, plugs into Ether's Web3.js, stuff like that, in essentially 15, 20 lines of code.
Very cool products. I'm also a developer myself, and I would like to look into and use all the products that we were talking about. And I think that's pretty much it for our panel. It was great talking to you guys, and let's get a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.